3 weeks before my wedding, on a cold Sunday morning in early April, I watched my entire family choose my sister over me for exactly $2,300. That was the amount my wedding venue still needed in final payment. And according to my mother, my sister's gender reveal party mattered more. If you've ever watched people you love quietly decide you were the optional one, you'll understand why this story still sits in my chest like a stone. And if something like that has ever happened to you, take a second to like and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for the quiet people who stayed when everyone else left. My name is Marissa Cole. I'm 31 years old, and the day my family abandoned my wedding was the day they accidentally created the best revenge of my life. But to explain that, I have to take you back to the beginning. 6 months before my wedding, Thanksgiving. My family's house in Franklin, Tennessee, always looked perfect from the outside. White siding, a wide porch, 2 maple trees framing the driveway like something from a real estate brochure. Inside the house, everything revolved around one person. My sister, Vanessa Cole, 2 years older than me, louder than me, and according to my parents, more important than me. My father, Gerald Cole, had worked 27 years as a regional manager for a home improvement chain, the kind of man who wore pressed khakis even on weekends and believed emotional conversations were a sign of weakness. My mother, Linda Cole, ran a small home decor boutique downtown. Together, they built the kind of middle-class life that looks stable from the outside. But in our family, stability always came with a hierarchy. Vanessa at the top, me somewhere below the furniture. Vanessa had always been the dramatic one, the one who needed attention the way some people need oxygen. In high school, she had 3 birthday parties every year, one for friends, one for family, and one just for fun party she invented, because she said 2 parties didn't feel like enough. And my parents let her, because Vanessa had a special talent. She knew how to make people feel guilty for not orbiting around her. By the time she turned 28, Vanessa had turned that talent into a career. She ran a small lifestyle influencer account online. Not huge, around 90,000 followers, but big enough that she treated every moment of her life like a staged production. Brunch photos, fake candid shots, engagement teasers. Everything had lighting, angles, and captions. My parents loved it. They told everyone their daughter was a public figure. I never said anything, because I was the quiet one, the practical one, the one who didn't need attention. I worked as a veterinary technician at an emergency animal hospital in Nashville. Night shifts mostly, 12 hours at a time. I cleaned wounds, I assisted surgeries. I comforted people when their pets didn't make it. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. And that was enough for me. I met my fiancé, Daniel Reeves, 2 years before the wedding. He came into the clinic with a pit bull that had swallowed half a tennis ball. Daniel was calm, polite, and when the dog woke up from surgery, he cried, right there in the exam room. Not loud crying, just quiet relief. That was the moment I noticed him. Daniel worked as a structural engineer. He designed bridges and highway supports for a firm in Nashville. His brain worked like a blueprint, precise, patient, reliable. Everything my family thought was boring. But to me, it felt safe. When Daniel proposed, it wasn't flashy. We were sitting on the tailgate of his truck at Percy Warner Park, watching the sunset. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket. Inside was a simple ring, white gold, a single diamond. Nothing extravagant, but it was perfect. We set the wedding date for April 12th, a small ceremony at a restored barn venue outside Franklin. 40 guests, a simple dinner, nothing dramatic. That's when Vanessa first went quiet, which should have been my warning, because my sister never stayed quiet unless she was planning something. At Thanksgiving dinner 6 months before the wedding, the entire family sat around the long oak table in my parents' dining room. Turkey, mashed potatoes, my mother's overly sweet cranberry sauce. Vanessa arrived 30 minutes late, wearing a cream sweater dress and carrying a camera tripod. She said she needed to film holiday content. My father laughed like that was normal. Halfway through dinner, Daniel mentioned he had just finished a large infrastructure contract for a county bridge project. He didn't brag, he just answered my uncle's question. But Vanessa tilted her head and smiled. "So you build bridges?" Daniel nodded. "Mostly." She looked at him like she was evaluating a used car. "That sounds stable." Then she glanced at me. Marissa always liked predictable things. The table laughed. I smiled politely, but Daniel's hand found mine under the table. He squeezed once. Later that night, while we were washing dishes in the kitchen, my mother leaned close and lowered her voice. "You know Vanessa is planning something big next spring." I blinked. "Like what?" She smiled. "A gender reveal." My sister wasn't even pregnant yet, but somehow the reveal party was already being planned. I laughed, because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. 2 months later, Vanessa announced her pregnancy on Instagram. 3 days after that, she announced the gender reveal party, April 12th, the same day as my wedding. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the location. The same vineyard venue, 2 miles from where Daniel and I were getting married. I called her immediately. Vanessa answered on the 4th ring. "Oh, hey, Riss. Did you know your gender reveal is the same day as my wedding?" She paused, like she was checking a calendar she already knew by heart. "Oh my God, is it?" "Yes, April 12th, 3 p.m. Another pause. "Well, the vineyard only had that weekend available. You understand, right?" "No, actually, I didn't, because the vineyard had been booked for 6 months. Vanessa knew that. Everyone knew that. She had been at the engagement dinner where we announced the date. But here was the part that turned my stomach. Vanessa's party started at 1 p.m. Mine started at 4, and the 2 venues were 40 minutes apart. Meaning one thing: nobody could attend both. And within a week, RSVPs started changing. Aunts, cousins, family friends. One by one, they canceled my wedding. Every message sounded the same. "We're so sorry, honey, but Vanessa's event is earlier, and you know how family is." Family. That word started to sound like a joke. By the time March arrived, 23 people had withdrawn from my wedding guest list. All of them relatives. My father avoided the subject. My mother said we should try to be understanding. Vanessa kept posting countdown stories online. "Gender reveal in 30 days. So blessed to have the whole family together." I stared at those posts at 2 in the morning after night shifts at the clinic, and something inside me slowly stopped hoping. Then one night, exactly 18 days before the wedding, Daniel walked into our apartment carrying a folder. He placed it on the kitchen table. "There's something I didn't want to bring up until after the wedding." I frowned. "What is it?" He opened the folder. Inside were engineering blueprints, contracts, numbers, large numbers. Daniel had just been selected to lead a private development project in Austin. A long-term structural contract. Total project value, $8.4 million. My heart stopped. "You never told me about this." He smiled. "I didn't want money to change how your family saw us." "But Marissa, they're about to find out anyway, because next week the company is announcing it publicly." I stared at the paperwork. My family still thought Daniel was some boring middle-class engineer. They had no idea he had just become the lead structural designer on one of the largest private construction projects in Texas. And then Daniel said something that changed everything. "There's also something else." He slid one more document across the table. A purchase agreement. For land. 17 acres. Outside Nashville. Daniel looked at me. "I bought it 3 weeks ago. I wanted to surprise you after the wedding. But I think your family might react differently once they know." I sat there staring at the papers. And for the first time since Vanessa scheduled her party on my wedding day, I smiled. Because suddenly the story my family thought they were writing was about to change. But what happened on the actual wedding day was even worse than I expected.
Tiếp chương 2.
18 days before my wedding, my guest list dropped from 42 people to 19. I remember the exact number because I counted the empty seats 3 times while sitting on the kitchen floor at 1:30 in the morning. Each empty chair felt like a quiet vote, and every single one of those votes had gone to my sister. If you've ever watched people slowly disappear from something important in your life, you know the strange kind of silence that follows. The kind where nobody actually says they're choosing someone else. They just quietly stop choosing you. So before we go any further, I'm curious about something. If your family scheduled a party on the exact same day as your wedding, would you move the wedding? Or would you keep the date? Tell me in the comments. Because what I decided next changed everything. But first, you need to understand exactly how calculated Vanessa's move was. The gender reveal invitation arrived in my mailbox 2 days after the first wave of cancellations. It was printed on thick, blush-colored cardstock with gold foil lettering. Vanessa Cole and Tyler Bennett invite you to celebrate the upcoming arrival of their little miracle. Saturday, April 12th, 1 p.m., Bellamont Vineyard Estate. I stared at it for a long time. Then I flipped it over. At the bottom, in smaller print, it read, "Hosted by Gerald and Linda Cole, my parents." They were funding the entire event. I drove to their house that evening. Franklin was only 20 minutes away, but the drive felt longer because every mile made something clearer in my mind. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision. My mother opened the door with that overly cheerful voice she used when she was about to say something unpleasant. "Marissa, honey, you should have called first." I held up the invitation. "Why are you hosting Vanessa's party on my wedding day?" She sighed like I'd asked something unreasonable. "Sweetheart, we already talked about this." "No, you told me it was a scheduling issue. This says you're hosting it." She didn't answer. My father was sitting in the living room, watching a golf tournament on television. He glanced over the back of the couch. "What's going on?" "Mom is hosting Vanessa's reveal party." He shrugged. "Your sister asked for help, and you said yes." He muted the television. "Marissa, it's just a small party. It's 120 guests." I knew that because Vanessa had posted the guest count online. My wedding had 42. Now, 19. My father rubbed his forehead. "Look, Vanessa's audience expects these things." Audience. He meant her followers. My sister had turned a pregnancy announcement into a sponsored event. Brand partnerships, photography crews, balloon installations, a drone camera. My wedding had wildflowers and homemade table decorations. My mother folded her arms. "You could move your ceremony, honey. It's not too late." The words landed softly, but they hit harder than anything else that day. Move my wedding. Daniel and I had paid deposits, printed invitations, ordered catering, booked a photographer. We'd spent months planning something simple but meaningful. And my mother wanted me to move it because Vanessa wanted better lighting for a gender reveal. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not sadness. Something colder. "No." My mother frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean the wedding is staying exactly where it is." My father sighed heavily. "You're being stubborn." That sentence had followed me my entire life. Any time I didn't bend around Vanessa. I didn't argue. Instead, I said something that made both of them uncomfortable. "How many family members are going to her party instead of my wedding?" Neither answered, because they already knew, almost all of them. My mother finally spoke. "Your Aunt Denise already booked a hotel near the vineyard. Uncle Robert's bringing the kids. Your cousins are helping decorate." I nodded slowly. "So everyone." My father looked irritated now. "Marissa, stop making this dramatic. Vanessa is pregnant. People want to celebrate that. You'll still have a lovely ceremony." Lovely. The word sounded like pity wrapped in ribbon. I stood there in the living room where I'd spent most of my childhood, looking at two people who genuinely believed they were being reasonable. And in that moment, I realized something painful. They didn't think they were choosing Vanessa. They thought Vanessa was the default choice. I was the optional one. I left without raising my voice, without crying, without arguing. Because suddenly, none of it felt worth the effort. When I got home, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing structural drawings. He looked up immediately. How bad was it? I sat down across from him. They're hosting it. He exhaled slowly. That explains the cancellations. I nodded. Then I told him something I hadn't admitted out loud yet. 19 guests. That's all that's left. Daniel didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand. Then we'll have 19 people who actually want to be there. I smiled faintly. You're supposed to say that. No. He leaned back in the chair. I mean it. But then he said something that caught my attention. Actually, there's one more person who might come. Who? Daniel shrugged. My old mentor, Arthur Maddox. I frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Daniel explained. Arthur had been his professor during graduate school at Vanderbilt, a structural engineer who had designed bridges all over the country before retiring. Arthur had been the one who recommended Daniel for the Austin project. He'd practically forced the company to consider him. Daniel had spoken about Arthur a few times before, always with a kind of quiet respect. Invite him. Daniel hesitated. I don't know if he'll come. He hates formal events. I shrugged. It's already a small wedding. One more chair won't hurt. Daniel sent the invitation that night, and for a few days I forgot about it, because the rest of the week was chaos. Work at the animal hospital, final fittings for my dress, last-minute calls with vendors. Meanwhile, Vanessa's gender reveal started appearing everywhere online. Sponsored posts, preview videos, a giant balloon installation being delivered to the vineyard. Her followers were obsessed. Comments poured in. This is going to be the reveal of the year. So iconic. Your family is so supportive. I read those words while sitting alone at the kitchen table one night. Supportive. That word stung. Because they were supportive, just not of me. 3 days later, Daniel received an email. He was standing at the sink when his phone buzzed. He read the message. Then he blinked. Then he read it again. What? He turned the phone toward me. Arthur Maddox had replied. Short message. I'll attend. No gift required. Just bring good whiskey. I laughed. Daniel smiled. He always liked you. That was how our guest list grew from 19 to 20. I didn't know it then, but that quiet RSVP from an old engineer was about to change the entire story. Because what Arthur Maddox did at my wedding would eventually make my sister's party look like a footnote. Chapter 3. 10 days before my wedding, my sister's gender reveal party reached 100,000 views on Instagram. My wedding website had 19 confirmed guests, and one of those guests was a 72-year-old engineer I had never met. That was the exact moment I realized something important. My sister was planning a spectacle. I was planning a marriage. And those two things live in very different worlds. Before we go further, let me ask you something honestly. If your entire family chose a party over your wedding, would you still invite them? Or would you close the door completely? I didn't know the answer yet, but the next few days forced me to think about it. Vanessa's event planning escalated quickly. Every morning my phone showed another post. Behind the scenes of the reveal, balloon deliveries, designer cakes, even a professional videographer explaining the drone shots they planned to capture the moment the balloons exploded. The video already had 50,000 views before the party even happened. Meanwhile, Daniel and I spent our evenings folding table cards at our kitchen counter. Our wedding venue was an old barn outside Franklin called Meadow Ridge. Wood beams, large windows, a small pond behind the ceremony arch. Nothing flashy, but when the sun hit the water at 4 in the afternoon, the whole place glowed. That was the moment I had fallen in love with when we toured the property. Simple, quiet, real. Daniel built the wooden arch himself in his garage. It took him 3 weekends. He sanded every corner smooth. I painted small wildflowers along the sides. The florist was a local farm that charged us $640 for everything. Vanessa's balloon wall alone cost $5,000. I knew that because she posted the invoice online as part of a sponsorship reveal. Every time I saw those posts, I felt a small knot in my stomach. Not jealousy, just a quiet realization. My family had decided which event mattered more. Then something strange happened. My father called me. Not a text, not a short message, an actual phone call. Marissa, his voice sounded awkward, like he was trying on unfamiliar words. I was wondering if you and Daniel wanted to come by for dinner Thursday. Why? He paused. Your mother thought it might be nice before the wedding. Nice. That word again. I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. Daniel and I arrived at the house Thursday evening around 6. The same porch, the same maple trees. But the driveway was full. 3 cars I didn't recognize. Inside the house, the dining table was set for 10 people. Vanessa was already there. She wore a pale pink sweater stretched tightly over her pregnant stomach. Her phone sat on the table recording. Oh, good, you made it. Her tone sounded rehearsed. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. I saw the camera lens pointed directly toward us. Vanessa smiled. I'm filming a family dinner for my followers, just casual content. Of course she was. My mother brought out plates, my father poured wine. Then Vanessa made the announcement. We're also going to talk about the reveal party plans tonight. I felt Daniel's hand tighten slightly. Vanessa continued talking. Her event planner had organized a countdown moment. Exactly at 2:30 p.m., a giant balloon structure would explode. Colored smoke would fill the vineyard. Drone cameras would capture everything. She described it like a movie premiere. Then she turned toward me. You and Daniel should stop by after your ceremony. You can still make it before the big reveal. My father nodded. That's a good compromise. Compromise. My wedding ceremony ended at 5. Her reveal was at 2:30, 40 minutes away. It wasn't a compromise. It was a suggestion that my wedding was the side event. Daniel spoke calmly. We won't be attending the reveal. Vanessa tilted her head. Why not? Because we'll be at our wedding reception. Her smile tightened slightly. Right. Well, if you change your mind, the door's open. The rest of dinner felt strange. My parents asked polite questions about the wedding. Vanessa kept checking her phone. Her follower count had just passed 100,000. When dessert arrived, she lifted a glass of champagne. A toast. To family. She smiled sweetly. And to new beginnings. Everyone clinked glasses. I noticed something interesting. Vanessa never once mentioned my wedding in the toast. After dinner, Daniel and I helped carry dishes to the kitchen. My mother leaned close while rinsing a plate. Honey, your father and I were thinking. About what? Maybe we could stop by your ceremony briefly. My heart paused. Before Vanessa's party. My chest tightened again. How briefly? Just long enough to say hello. Your father could still walk you down the aisle. Then we'd leave for the vineyard. Leave. Before the ceremony finished. Before the vows. Before the reception. I turned off the faucet slowly. No. My mother blinked. What do you mean? I mean, if Dad walks me down the aisle, he stays. Or he doesn't come at all. My mother looked shocked. Marissa, that's unfair. Unfair. I thought about the empty chairs, the canceled RSVPs, the invitations people ignored. No. What's unfair is asking someone to be half present on their daughter's wedding day. My father walked into the kitchen just in time to hear that. He crossed his arms. You're putting us in a difficult position. I met his eyes. No, Vanessa already did that. The kitchen fell silent. For the first time in years, no one rushed to defend my sister. Vanessa finally walked in. What's going on? My father hesitated. Your sister says if I walk her down the aisle, we have to stay the whole time. Vanessa laughed softly. That's dramatic. I looked at her. You scheduled your party on my wedding day. You invited the entire family. You knew exactly what would happen. Her smile faded slightly. It's just timing. Then she said the sentence I will never forget. You can have another wedding someday. This is my first baby. The words sat in the air like something poisonous. Daniel stepped forward then, calm, controlled. Marissa will only have one wedding. Vanessa shrugged. We'll see. Something about the way she said that made my stomach twist. Then my father cleared his throat. Enough. We'll figure this out later. Dinner ended awkwardly. Daniel and I left soon after. Halfway home, he finally spoke. You handled that well. I stared out the window. Did I? Yes, you stopped negotiating. He was right. For the first time in my life, I had stopped trying to convince my family to choose me. But what I didn't know yet was that someone else had already chosen my side. The next morning, Daniel received another message from Arthur Maddox. Short, direct. I'll be bringing a guest. Hope that's all right. Daniel replied yes. Then Arthur sent one more message. This wedding might end up being more important than you realize. At the time, we thought he was just being polite. We had no idea what he actually meant. Dipchungbun. 7 days before my wedding, my father stopped answering my calls. And on the exact same morning, my sister's gender reveal sponsorship deal was announced. $25,000. That was the amount a lifestyle brand paid Vanessa to film the reveal party at the vineyard. $25,000 for a 2-minute video of a balloon exploding. The internet loved it. The comments were endless. Best reveal ever. Your family is so supportive. I stared at those words while sitting in the break room at the animal hospital at 3 a.m, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. Supportive. That word had started to feel like a joke. By that point, the situation in my family had shifted into something colder. Nobody was arguing anymore. They were simply avoiding the conversation. My father hadn't responded to my last message in 4 days. My mother sent polite texts about the weather. Vanessa kept posting countdown videos. 5 days until baby Bennett's big reveal. Meanwhile, my wedding planning had become strangely quiet. When half your guest list disappears, the logistics get easier. Less food, fewer chairs, smaller tables. Our caterer called to confirm the final numbers. 19 guests. He paused on the phone. You sure that's correct? Yes. He hesitated again. Well, the food will be excellent at least. Daniel and I laughed about that later. Sometimes awkward honesty is better than polite lies. But beneath the laughter, there was something heavier. The quiet realization that my wedding would look very different than I imagined when we first started planning it. 4 days before the ceremony, my cousin Lauren called. Lauren had always been one of the few relatives I liked. She was honest, blunt, not easily impressed by Vanessa's online world. Her voice sounded nervous. Hey. She hesitated. I wanted to tell you something before the weekend. My stomach tightened. What is it? Vanessa has been calling everyone again. Calling? Yeah, individually. She told Aunt Denise that if anyone skipped the reveal, it would ruin the sponsorship deal. Suing it how? Lauren exhaled slowly. Apparently, the brand contract requires at least 100 guests in the background footage. I stared at the wall. So she's making attendance mandatory. Pretty much, Lauren continued. She also told people your ceremony would probably run late anyway, so they shouldn't risk missing the reveal moment. That sentence sat in my chest like a small stone. She wasn't just scheduling over my wedding. She was actively discouraging people from coming. Lauren spoke again. I'm still coming to your wedding. You know that, right? I swallowed. Thank you. But I already knew something. Lauren would probably be the only family member there. After we hung up, I told Daniel everything. He listened quietly. Then he leaned back in his chair. Your sister turned your wedding into a marketing problem. Yeah, but that was Vanessa. Everything in her life had a brand angle, even family events. Then Daniel said something thoughtful. Do you know what the funniest part is? What? Your wedding is the real event, but the internet only sees the balloons. That sentence stayed with me because it was true. The world was watching Vanessa's spectacle. Nobody cared about a quiet ceremony in a barn with 19 guests. That night, something unexpected happened. Daniel received another message from Arthur Maddox. Short again, precise. My guest will arrive separately. Name is Eleanor Hart. Daniel stared at the screen. Do you know who that is? I shook my head. Arthur called immediately after. His voice sounded amused. Daniel. Just letting you know, Eleanor confirmed. Daniel frowned. Who exactly is Eleanor Hart? Arthur chuckled softly. Let's just say she's the reason your Austin contract happened. Daniel went silent. Wait, you mean the investor group? Yes. Eleanor owns 40% of the development company. I almost dropped my phone. The Austin project Daniel had been selected for was worth nearly $9 million. Eleanor Hart was one of the primary investors behind it. Daniel spoke slowly. You invited one of the project owners to our wedding? Arthur corrected him. No, I told her about your wedding. She invited herself. Why? Arthur's answer surprised both of us. Because she likes meeting people before they become successful. Daniel looked stunned. Arthur continued calmly. You're about to build the most visible project your firm has ever handled. Investors like to know the people behind that work. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Arthur, our wedding has 19 guests. Arthur laughed. Then it should be very easy to meet everyone. The call ended shortly after. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Daniel. So one of the investors from your $9 million project is coming to our wedding. Looks like it. Why? Daniel smiled slightly. Arthur likes creating interesting situations. That sounded like a strange answer. But Arthur Maddox had always been a strange man. 2 days before the wedding, the seating chart was finalized. 21 chairs now. 19 original guests, Arthur Maddox, and Eleanor Hart. I placed their names near the center table, not because of their status, but because Arthur was Daniel's mentor. That seemed respectful. Meanwhile, Vanessa's party preparations were becoming absurd. The vineyard parking lot was being expanded for media vans. A stage had been installed. Professional photographers were testing lighting setups. The drone company posted a promotional video showing aerial shots of the vineyard. Over 200,000 people watched it. Every comment said the same thing. Best reveal ever. Your family must be so proud. I wondered if any of those strangers knew that the bride 2 miles away had lost most of her family to that exact event. The night before the wedding, Daniel and I sat together on the floor of our apartment, surrounded by wedding decorations. He was tying ribbons around small glass jars. I was finishing the place cards. Our apartment smelled like lavender. You okay? I thought for a moment. Yeah. Really? Yeah. He looked surprised. I smiled faintly. Because I stopped expecting them to show up. That's when the disappointment loses its power. Daniel nodded slowly. Then he said something that turned out to be prophetic. Sometimes the people who skip your big day end up missing something much bigger. At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. I had no idea how literally true that sentence would become. Because the next morning, the wedding day, my family would make one final decision, and it would echo far beyond that barn in Franklin. Chapter 5. At 8:10 a.m. on the morning of my wedding, my father called to tell me he wasn't coming. Not running late, not stuck in traffic, not feeling sick. He simply wasn't coming. And he said it in a voice so calm, it sounded like he was canceling a lunch reservation. If you've ever waited your entire life for someone to show up for you, only to realize they never will, you already know how quiet that moment feels. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something honestly. If your own father canceled walking you down the aisle on the morning of your wedding, would you still answer his calls afterward? I didn't know the answer yet, but that morning changed everything. My wedding day started early. The sky was pale gray over Franklin when I woke up. April mornings in Tennessee have that strange quiet before the sun rises. The air smells like wet grass and wood. Daniel was already awake. He sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and reviewing something on his laptop. Nervous? He smiled. Only about 70%. I laughed softly. That felt good. Because despite everything that had happened over the past month, I was still excited to marry him. That part of the day hadn't changed. By 9 o'clock, Rachel arrived. Rachel was my best friend from veterinary school. She worked night shifts at the same animal hospital and had volunteered to be my maid of honor the moment Daniel proposed. Rachel didn't believe in sugarcoating things, which is why she walked into the apartment, looked at the wedding decorations stacked by the door, and said exactly what she was thinking. "Your family really sucks." I snorted. "That's one way to say it." She hugged me tightly. Then she started unpacking makeup brushes like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Today, we focus on the people who actually came. And that was the plan. We would focus on the people who showed up. At 10:45, my phone rang. Dad. For a second, I thought maybe he was calling to say he was on his way. I answered. "Hi." His voice sounded strange, flat. "Marissa, honey, I need to talk to you about something." My stomach tightened. "Okay?" There was a pause. Then he said it. "Your mother and I won't be able to make it today." The words landed like cold water. "Why?" Another pause. The Nessa's reveal starts at 1, and with traffic, we wouldn't make it back to Franklin in time. My brain needed a second to process what he had just said. "So you're choosing her party." Don't put it that way. There it was, that phrase again. Don't put it that way. Like the problem was my interpretation, not the decision. "Dad, you promised you would walk me down the aisle." "I know," his voice softened slightly. "But this reveal is important." Important? The word echoed in my head. My wedding, apparently, wasn't. "You'll have other moments," he said gently. "Vanessa only gets one first baby." I stared at the kitchen wall. My hand had started shaking slightly. This is my only wedding day. My father exhaled slowly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." 8 seconds of silence followed. 8 seconds that explained my entire childhood. Every school event he missed. Every art competition he skipped. Every moment Vanessa somehow needed him more. Finally, I said something very simple. "Okay," that was it. No yelling, no crying. Just okay. I hung up. Rachel was standing in the doorway watching my face. "That bad?" "He's not coming." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Of course he isn't." I set the phone down on the counter. My chest felt strangely calm, like a door had closed somewhere deep inside. The part of me that kept hoping my family would change? It was gone. And the strange thing was, the calm felt better than the hope ever had. At noon, we arrived at Meadow Ridge. The barn looked beautiful. White chairs lined the grass in neat rows, lavender tied to each one. Daniel's wooden arch stood at the end of the aisle overlooking the pond. The caterers were setting tables inside. Soft music floated through the open barn doors. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the ceremony the way I once pictured it. 40 guests, my father walking beside me, my mother crying quietly in the front row. That version of the day existed only in my head now. Reality looked different. By 2:30, the guests began arriving. Rachel, Daniel's parents, 3 of his co-workers, Lauren, my cousin, 2 friends from the animal hospital. Arthur Maddox arrived at 3 sharp. He was taller than I expected. Silver hair, dark suit, the kind of calm presence that makes people stand straighter when he enters a room. He shook Daniel's hand firmly. Then he looked at me. "You must be Marissa." I nodded. He smiled gently. "Beautiful day for a wedding." Then another car pulled into the gravel lot. A black sedan. A woman stepped out. Tall, elegant, mid-50s maybe. She wore a navy dress and carried herself like someone used to important rooms. Arthur walked over to greet her. "Marissa, Daniel, this is Eleanor Hart." Daniel shook her hand carefully. "It's an honor to meet you." She smiled warmly. I wanted to see the people building my bridges. Then she turned to me. And the bride? Congratulations. Something about her voice felt genuine, not polite, real. By 3:30, the ceremony chairs were filled. 21 guests. That was it. 21 people in 42 chairs, half empty. The wind moved gently through the lavender tied to the seats. Rachel adjusted my dress. Vintage lace. Ivory. Found in a consignment shop for $220. You look incredible. I took a breath. The music began. Daniel stood at the end of the aisle beneath the wooden arch he built himself. He looked nervous, and hopeful, and completely certain. But there was still one problem. I stood at the beginning of the aisle, alone. No father, no one to walk beside me. For a moment, the silence felt heavy. Then, Arthur Maddox stepped forward. If the bride allows it. His voice was calm. I would be honored to walk you down the aisle. I blinked. Arthur extended his arm, a small gesture, but somehow it filled the space my father left behind. I took his arm, and together we stepped forward. 21 people stood. The ceremony began, and 2 miles away, my sister's reveal party was about to explode on camera. Chapter 6. At exactly 2:32 p.m., 2 miles away from my wedding, a giant pink smoke cannon exploded over a vineyard and revealed my sister was having a girl. At exactly 4:07 p.m., I said my vows in front of 21 people and a row of empty chairs. And somehow, my ceremony felt louder than the party with 200 guests. If you've ever had a moment where the world expected you to feel small, but you didn't, you know the strange kind of power that brings. And I'm curious about something. Do you think a wedding needs a big crowd to matter? Or just the right people? Keep that question in your mind while I tell you what happened next. Arthur Maddox walked beside me down the aisle like he had been doing it his entire life. Steady, calm, unhurried. The gravel path crunched softly beneath our steps. I could feel every single empty chair as we passed them. But something strange happened halfway down the aisle. I stopped noticing the empty seats because I started noticing the people who were there. Rachel wiping tears from her eyes. Daniel's parents smiling proudly. Lauren giving me a small, encouraging nod. Arthur leaned slightly closer as we walked. Your father made a mistake today. His voice wasn't angry, just factual. I didn't answer because there was nothing to say. Arthur added one more quiet sentence. But mistakes like that tend to echo. We reached the arch. Daniel's eyes were red. He looked at Arthur. Thank you. Arthur gave a short nod and stepped aside. The officiant was an older judge Daniel knew from a civic infrastructure committee. He kept the ceremony simple. No dramatic speeches, no drawn-out rituals, just vows. When it was Daniel's turn, he unfolded a small piece of paper. His hands were shaking slightly. Marissa, when I met you 2 years ago, my dog had half a tennis ball stuck in his stomach. You were calm while everyone else panicked. You fixed the problem. Then you stayed with me until I stopped shaking. That was the moment I knew something important about you. You show up when things are hard, even when other people don't. He paused. The wind moved softly across the pond behind us. I promise to show up for you the same way, every time, every day, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's difficult, even when the whole world decides something else is more important. I swallowed hard, because those words landed deeper than he probably realized. Then it was my turn. I didn't bring paper. I had memorized everything. Daniel, the first thing I noticed about you was that you cried when your dog woke up from surgery. Most people would be embarrassed by that, but you weren't. You just loved something enough to care. I looked at him, and that's why I'm standing here today. Because you care about the things that matter. People, work, promises. You build things that hold weight, and I trust you to hold mine. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. Short, simple, real. When the judge pronounced us married, 21 people clapped, and it sounded louder than I expected. Inside the barn, the reception had already started. String lights hung from the wooden beams, small tables with mason jars of wildflowers, a long table of food. Nothing extravagant, but warm. The caterer brought out plates, barbecue chicken, roasted vegetables, cornbread, comfort food. Rachel poured wine for everyone. Daniel connected a playlist to the speakers. The music started quietly. The atmosphere relaxed. Arthur and Eleanor Hart sat together near the center table. They spoke softly while watching Daniel greet guests. I noticed Eleanor studying the wooden arch outside through the barn door. After dinner, she approached me. "Marissa, congratulations again. Thank you for coming." She smiled. "I'm glad I did." Her eyes moved around the barn. "It's refreshing." "What is?" "An event that isn't trying to impress anyone." I laughed softly. That wasn't exactly intentional. She tilted her head. Sometimes authenticity happens by accident. Arthur joined us. "Daniel tells me you're a veterinary technician." I nodded. "Emergency animal hospital." Arthur raised his eyebrows slightly. "That's difficult work." "It is, but worth it." Eleanor watched me for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. "People who do jobs like that usually build stable lives." I wasn't sure what she meant. Before I could ask, Daniel joined us, carrying 3 glasses of wine. Arthur lifted his glass. "A toast to Daniel and Marissa, to building things that last longer than applause." Everyone nearby raised their glasses. The toast was simple, but something about Arthur's words lingered. Longer than applause. Later that evening, Daniel and I stepped outside for a few minutes. The sun was starting to lower behind the trees. Golden light reflected off the pond. The air smelled like grass and barbecue smoke. I leaned against him. "You okay?" "Better than I expected." He kissed my forehead. "You know something interesting?" "What?" "Right now, your sister's reveal video is probably going viral." "Probably. But nobody here cares." He gestured toward the barn. Inside, our 21 guests were laughing, talking, dancing slowly on the wooden floor. Rachel had convinced Daniel's parents to join her in a ridiculous dance routine. Lauren was taking pictures. Arthur and Eleanor were deep in conversation with Daniel's coworkers. And suddenly I realized something. This room felt full. Not because of numbers, because of intention. Then Daniel said something that made me curious. Arthur mentioned something earlier, about mistakes echoing. "Yeah, what did he mean?" Daniel hesitated. "Arthur doesn't say things casually, which means he probably knows something we don't." That sentence stayed in my head because Arthur Maddox had been watching our family drama quietly for months. And men like Arthur rarely observe situations without understanding the consequences. Meanwhile, 2 miles away at the vineyard, my sister's reveal video was already spreading across the internet. 500,000 views, and climbing. But none of the people filming that video realized something. While they were celebrating a moment designed for attention, a much quieter moment had just introduced Daniel to someone who controlled millions of dollars in future projects. And Eleanor Hart was very interested in the kind of man who kept showing up, even when everyone else left. But the real problem for my sister hadn't even started yet, because 3 days later, a photograph from my wedding would begin circulating online. And that picture would make Vanessa realize something terrifying. She had underestimated the wrong couple. Chapter 7. 3 days after my wedding, my sister's gender reveal video passed 1.8 million views, and a single photograph from my wedding quietly began circulating through an entirely different audience. At first, nobody in my family noticed, because the photo didn't go viral on Instagram. It didn't trend on TikTok. It didn't involve pink smoke or balloon explosions. It appeared in a very different place, a private investor newsletter, and the caption read something simple. "The engineer behind the upcoming Austin Riverspan project, celebrating his wedding in Franklin, Tennessee." That's when things started shifting. If you've ever watched people ignore you for years and then suddenly treat you differently once success appears nearby, You know the strange kind of attention that follows. I'm curious about something before we go further. When people suddenly show interest after ignoring you for years, do you give them another chance? Or do you remember how they treated you before? That question became very important for me. The Monday after the wedding felt strangely normal. Daniel and I woke up in our small apartment surrounded by leftover wedding decorations. Lavender jars, folded table runners, half a cake box Rachel had insisted we bring home. The sun was shining through the kitchen window. For the first time in months, there was nothing left to plan, just life. Daniel sat at the table reviewing engineering documents again. His Austin project was moving quickly. Construction approvals, permit filings, budget revisions, real adult responsibilities. I was answering emails from the animal hospital when his phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then again. He frowned slightly. That's strange. What? 3 emails from people I don't know? He opened the first one, then the second, then the third. Each message looked similar. Congratulations on your wedding. Looking forward to seeing the Riverspan development progress. Let me know if you're attending the Dallas Infrastructure Forum next month. Daniel looked confused. How do they know I got married? I shrugged. Maybe Arthur told someone. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Eleanor Hart. It was short. Lovely ceremony. Also, congratulations. The photo is making the rounds. Daniel blinked. What photo? She attached a link. Daniel tapped it. A professional photograph filled the screen. It was from our ceremony. Arthur walking me down the aisle. Daniel waiting under the wooden arch. The pond behind us reflecting afternoon sunlight. The lavender-lined chairs. 21 guests standing. It looked beautiful. Not staged. Not dramatic. Just real. Below the image was a short paragraph. Daniel Reeves, lead structural engineer for the upcoming Riverspan infrastructure development in Austin, celebrated his wedding this weekend in Franklin, Tennessee. Reeves has quickly become one of the youngest project leads associated with the investment group backing the development. Daniel read the caption twice. Then he leaned back slowly. Arthur. Of course. Arthur Maddox had spent 40 years in the engineering world. He knew exactly how industry circles worked. And apparently, he had quietly shared the photo with a few people. Not as a publicity stunt, just as a subtle introduction. Daniel Reeves, project lead, reliable, married, stable. Those things mattered in investor circles. I smiled slightly. Your wedding became a networking event. Daniel laughed, without either of us realizing it. The rest of the day passed quietly. Work, groceries, laundry. A normal Monday. Then, around 5 in the evening, my phone rang. Lauren. My cousin rarely called during work hours. Hey! Her voice sounded excited. Marissa, did you see the article? What article? The one about Daniel. I frowned. What are you talking about? She sent me a link. I opened it. It wasn't a full article, more like a small industry feature. But the photo was the same one. Arthur walking me down the aisle. Daniel beneath the arch. The caption mentioned the Austin Riverspan project again, and at the bottom was a detail I hadn't noticed before. Estimated project value, $8.4 million. Lauren spoke quickly. Vanessa saw it. My stomach tightened. How? Someone sent it in the family group chat. What happened? Lauren let out a short laugh. You should see the messages. She forwarded screenshots. My mother. Wait, Daniel is running an $8 million project? My Aunt Denise. I thought he just designed small bridges. My Uncle Robert. That photo is beautiful, actually. Then Vanessa. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? I stared at the screen. Because nobody asked. Lauren spoke again. Your sister is freaking out. Why? Because people in her comments section started recognizing Daniel's name. Apparently, one of her followers works in construction finance. They asked if your husband was the same engineer involved in the Riverspan project, Vanessa had replied. Probably a coincidence. Except now the article proved it wasn't. Lauren continued. Vanessa just posted a new story. What kind of story? Family is everything. Always proud of my little sister. I laughed quietly. That was fast. Very. Then Lauren said something that made me pause. Your mom called Vanessa after seeing the article. Apparently, she asked why Daniel never told the family about the project. I already knew the answer to that, because the family never asked about Daniel. They only asked about Vanessa. But the real twist happened that evening. At 8:30, my phone rang again. Dad, the same father who had skipped my wedding 3 days earlier. I stared at the screen. Rachel's voice echoed in my memory. Your family really sucks. Daniel looked at me. You don't have to answer. I let the phone ring. But something inside me was curious, so I picked up. Hi. My father's voice sounded different, lighter. Marissa, sweetheart, congratulations. Congratulations? On what? Your wedding, your success, your husband's project. You two must be doing very well. I leaned back in the chair. We're doing fine. He cleared his throat. Your mother and I were thinking maybe we should all have dinner soon. All of us. Family dinner. The words felt strange. Family dinner. 3 days earlier, he couldn't drive 40 minutes to walk me down the aisle. Now he wanted dinner. I didn't answer immediately. Dad spoke again. We're proud of you. That sentence landed awkwardly, because it sounded like he had just discovered something new about me. I finally said something simple. I'll think about it. After the call ended, Daniel raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, family dinner? I nodded. Amazing how quickly priorities change. But what my father didn't know yet was that someone else had also seen the wedding photo. Someone connected to the Austin project. Someone who controlled far more money than the investors already involved. And that person had just asked Daniel a very interesting question. Would you consider expanding the project? That single question was about to turn our quiet wedding into the beginning of something much bigger. And my sister, who had spent months chasing online attention, was about to realize she had accidentally ignored the wrong story. Tiếp chương 8. 10 days after my wedding, my sister finally called me. Not to apologize, not to congratulate me, to ask a question about money. The call came at 7:18 p.m. on a Tuesday evening while Daniel and I were eating takeout on our couch. Thai noodles, 2 beers, a quiet night. My phone buzzed. Vanessa. The same sister who had scheduled her gender reveal on my wedding day. The same sister who hadn't sent a single message after the ceremony. And now she was calling. If you've ever had someone ignore you for months and suddenly reappear once they think you might be useful, you already know how that conversation usually goes. But I'm curious about something before I continue. When someone who hurt you comes back acting friendly, do you hear them out? Or do you end the call immediately? I hesitated for a moment before answering. Daniel watched my face. You don't have to pick up. I considered it, but curiosity won, I answered. Hello? Vanessa's voice sounded overly cheerful. Hey, Riss. She hadn't called me that nickname in years. Hi, Vanessa. There was a short pause, like she was deciding which tone to use. So, congratulations. Thanks. Your wedding looked really pretty in that photo, the one from the article. I said nothing. She continued talking. I didn't realize Daniel's project was that big. $8 million is impressive. There it was, the real reason for the call. Not my wedding, not my marriage. Daniel's contract. I took a slow sip of beer. He's worked really hard. Yeah, she laughed softly. You should have told the family. The sentence was almost funny, because the family had never asked. Vanessa lowered her voice slightly. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. Here it comes. Tyler's company is looking for investors. Tyler was her boyfriend, the father of the baby. He ran a small marketing startup that mostly helped influencers manage brand deals, which meant Vanessa was basically his biggest client. Vanessa continued, We're expanding. opening a bigger office, hiring staff. And since Daniel is working on these huge projects now, maybe he knows people who might want to invest. There it was, the entire purpose of the call. Networking. Through the sister she ignored. Daniel raised an eyebrow across the couch. He could already guess the conversation. I asked calmly, "How much investment are you looking for?" Vanessa answered immediately, "300,000. I almost choked on my drink. $300,000. She said it casually, like she was asking to borrow a lawnmower. Tyler says if we secure that amount, we can scale the company nationally. I let a few seconds pass. And in that silence, something became clear. Vanessa genuinely believed this was a normal request. She had spent her entire life being the center of the family's attention. So of course, she assumed access to Daniel's professional network was automatic. I finally spoke. "Vanessa, you scheduled a party on my wedding day." She sighed. "Are we really still talking about that?" "Yes. You asked the entire family to skip my ceremony. You didn't even send a message after." Her voice hardened slightly. "I was busy. Busy. With a party that had balloon cannons and drone cameras." I kept my voice calm. "And now you're asking for business connections." "It's not like that." "How is it different?" Another pause. Vanessa hated conversations where she couldn't control the narrative. "You're being dramatic." That word again. The same one my mother used. Dramatic. Family members love that word when they want to dismiss accountability. I spoke slowly. "You told people my wedding could happen any time. You said your party mattered more." Her silence confirmed it. She remembered saying that. Finally, she replied, "Well, this business opportunity matters too." There it was, the real Vanessa. Every relationship was a transaction. I leaned back on the couch. Daniel watched quietly. "I'm not comfortable recommending investments to Tyler's company." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Why not?" "Because Daniel's professional reputation is involved." "That's ridiculous. You're acting like we're strangers." I almost laughed. "We barely spoke for 3 months." She didn't respond, so I continued. "If Tyler wants investors, he should pitch them directly." Vanessa inhaled sharply. "You're really going to hold a grudge over one party?" One party. That's what she thought this was. I said something that surprised even me. "I'm not holding a grudge. I'm adjusting expectations." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Then Vanessa changed tactics. "You know Mom and Dad are having financial problems now." That caught my attention. "What?" "Brett stopped helping with the mortgage." Brett was Vanessa's wealthy former boyfriend, who used to help my parents with house expenses. Apparently, that support had disappeared. Vanessa continued. "They're struggling with the payments." Daniel and I exchanged a glance. Interesting, because suddenly the timing of my father's phone call 3 days earlier made more sense. Family dinner. Pride. Congratulations. It wasn't just about the article. It was about money. Vanessa spoke again. "If Daniel knows investors, maybe they could also help Tyler's business, and maybe even help Mom and Dad with their house situation." The layers of expectation were becoming impressive. Networking, investments, financial rescue, all through the daughter whose wedding they skipped. I answered calmly. "Daniel's investors are focused on infrastructure, not influencer marketing companies." Vanessa sounded irritated now. "You're being selfish." That word almost made me smile. Selfish. Because apparently refusing to offer financial connections to people who ignored you counts as selfish. I said something simple. "Vanessa, when someone shows you where you stand in their life, you should believe them." She didn't respond. Then she said something colder. "Don't forget who your family is." That sentence echoed in my ears for a moment, because for the first time, I realized something important. My family had spent 30 years teaching me my place, but I had never decided if I wanted to stay there. I spoke quietly. "Family shows up." Vanessa hung up. The line went dead. Daniel finally spoke. That escalated quickly. I nodded. But something else had also become clear. My sister wasn't the only one paying attention to Daniel's growing reputation. Because that same evening, Daniel received an email from Eleanor Hart. The subject line had only 5 words. We need to discuss expansion. And the number mentioned inside that message was not $8 million. It was $22 million, which meant one thing. The project Daniel was leading was about to become 3 times bigger. And the moment that news became public, my family would realize exactly how badly they had misjudged the quiet engineer they ignored. But the real confrontation, the one my sister never expected, was coming at a much more public event. Tiếp chương 9, Chapter 9. 4 weeks after my wedding, I received an invitation from my sister. Not an apology, not a message asking how I was doing. An invitation. Vanessa was hosting a charity gala. Ticket price? $500 per seat. And according to the invitation, the event was meant to celebrate community, family, and new beginnings. The irony was almost impressive. If you've ever had someone ignore you when you needed them, then suddenly invite you somewhere once they think you're useful, you already know the kind of performance that usually follows. But I want to ask you something before we continue. Would you attend an event hosted by someone who publicly embarrassed you? Or would you stay home and protect your peace? I thought about that question for a long time. The invitation arrived by email, a glossy digital card with Vanessa's name in gold lettering. Hosted by Vanessa Bennett, Charity Gala for Future Mothers Initiative. Location, Bellamont Vineyard. The exact same place she held the gender reveal. Apparently, the venue had worked well for her brand image. Daniel read the invitation over my shoulder. This is the same vineyard. Yep, same place, different party. He raised an eyebrow. You think this is coincidence? No, Vanessa didn't do coincidences. She did strategy. The event description included a guest list preview, local business owners, influencers, a few politicians, sponsors, media photographers, and one particular line caught my attention. Special recognition of community investors supporting regional development. Daniel noticed it too. That's interesting. Because 2 weeks earlier, Eleanor Hart had officially confirmed the expansion of the Austin Riverspan project. New investors had joined. The project value had grown from $4 million to $22 million. Daniel was still the lead structural engineer, which meant his name had begun appearing in regional development reports, construction publications, investor briefings. Vanessa had definitely seen those updates. And suddenly, she was hosting a gala with business guests. Daniel leaned back in the chair. Your sister is building a networking event. Yes, and she wants us there. I opened the RSVP section. 2 seats reserved, Marissa Cole Reeves and Daniel Reeves. Vanessa hadn't asked if we wanted to come. She assumed we would. Then my phone buzzed. Another message. This time from my mother. Honey, did you see Vanessa's gala invitation? Yes. You and Daniel should go. Why? It's good exposure. Exposure. That word sounded exactly like something Vanessa would say. Mom continued. There will be investors there. Maybe Daniel can make useful connections. Daniel laughed quietly. She still thinks I need networking help. I typed a simple response. We'll think about it. Then I put the phone down. The truth was, I hadn't decided yet, because attending that event would mean stepping back into Vanessa's world, her stage, her audience, her carefully constructed narrative. But Daniel said something that changed my perspective. If we go, we control our own story. That sentence stuck with me, because for months Vanessa had been controlling the story about our family. The successful influencer sister, the quiet younger sister, the ordinary engineer husband. But things had changed, and the gala would be the first time our worlds collided publicly. 3 days later, I received another message, this one from Lauren. You're not going to believe what Vanessa said today. What now? She's telling people you and Daniel are attending the gala as honored guests. honored guests? That was news to me. Apparently, she told sponsors that your husband is involved in a major infrastructure development project. Daniel raised an eyebrow when I showed him the message. She's advertising us. Looks like it. Then Lauren added one more detail. And she told everyone the whole family supported her career. I stared at the screen. That sentence felt almost surreal. Because 3 weeks earlier, that same family couldn't drive 40 minutes to attend my wedding. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. You know what this means. What? She thinks we'll help her credibility. Probably. And if we don't show up? He smiled slightly. Then she has to explain why. That was the moment I made my decision. We're going. Daniel turned around. You sure? Yes. If Vanessa wants to present a story about family unity, she can do it with us in the room. The gala took place on a Saturday evening, exactly 6 weeks after my wedding. The vineyard looked very different at night. String lights across the courtyard, round tables with white linens, a stage near the center. Camera crews moving around capturing footage. The guest list was large, at least 100 people, influencers, local entrepreneurs, a few politicians. And Vanessa standing near the entrance, greeting everyone like a celebrity. She wore a red evening dress, her pregnant stomach carefully highlighted for photos. When she saw Daniel and me walk in, her smile froze for half a second. Then it returned, wide, polished, camera ready. Marissa, Daniel, so glad you made it. She hugged me quickly. The gesture felt rehearsed, almost theatrical. Then she leaned close. I'm really happy you're here. Of course she was, because our presence validated the narrative she had been telling her guests. Vanessa turned to the crowd. Everyone, this is my sister Marissa and her husband Daniel. He's leading a huge infrastructure project in Texas. Several heads turned. People suddenly became interested. Handshakes, introductions, questions about the Riverspan project. Daniel answered politely, calm, professional, exactly the way he handled every conversation. Vanessa looked pleased, because the moment was working exactly how she imagined. Her event, her connections, her spotlight. But what she didn't know was that someone else in that room had also noticed Daniel. Someone Vanessa had not invited. Someone who had arrived quietly 10 minutes earlier. And when that person stepped onto the stage later that evening, the entire room would hear a story Vanessa couldn't control. And suddenly, her carefully staged gala would become something very different. Chapter 10. At 8:42 p.m., during my sister's charity gala, the host of the evening asked if anyone else wanted to say a few words. Vanessa had just finished a 10-minute speech about family support, about community, about how important it is to lift each other up. And that's when a voice from the back of the room said something that made the entire vineyard go quiet. I would. The person who stood up was not on Vanessa's program, and he wasn't someone she had invited. It was Arthur Maddox. If you've ever watched someone carefully build a story about themselves and then suddenly lose control of that story in public, you know the kind of silence that fills the room. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If someone publicly took credit for something they didn't earn, would you call them out in front of everyone? Or stay quiet? Arthur Maddox had never been the quiet type. The gala had been moving exactly the way Vanessa planned. Soft jazz music, wine glasses clinking, a photographer capturing every moment. The stage stood at the center of the courtyard, with a microphone and a large banner behind it. Future Mothers Initiative Charity Gala. Vanessa's nonprofit had launched only 2 weeks earlier, which meant the entire organization existed mostly on paper. But the audience didn't know that. Most guests were local business owners and sponsors, people who liked the idea of supporting a charitable cause. And Vanessa was good at selling ideas. She stood under the lights with a microphone in her hand, speaking with the confidence of someone who had practiced the speech 20 times. Family is the foundation of everything we do. She smiled toward my parents seated near the front. My mother looked proud. My father nodded politely. Vanessa continued, without family support, none of us would be where we are today. Daniel squeezed my hand slightly. We both heard the irony. Vanessa gestured toward us. My sister Marissa and her husband Daniel are also here tonight. They're doing incredible things. Daniel is leading a major infrastructure development project in Texas. More applause, more smiles. Vanessa loved that moment, because in her mind, Daniel's growing reputation reflected positively on her. Family success became shared success, at least in the story she was telling. She wrapped up her speech with a practiced flourish. And remember, success means nothing unless you bring your family along with you. Applause filled the courtyard. People clapped politely. A few guests stood. Vanessa stepped back from the microphone, looking satisfied. Then the event coordinator spoke. Would anyone else like to say a few words tonight? That's when Arthur's voice appeared. I would. Every head turned. Arthur Maddox stood near the back table beside Eleanor Hart. He looked exactly the same as he had at my wedding. Calm, straight-backed, unimpressed by attention. Vanessa blinked. She hadn't expected additional speakers, but she couldn't refuse without looking rude. Of course, please. Arthur walked slowly to the stage. The microphone adjusted slightly as he stood behind it. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He simply looked out over the audience. Then he spoke. My name is Arthur Maddox. Some of you may know me from the civil engineering field. A few guests in the crowd immediately straightened. Arthur's reputation carried weight in infrastructure circles. I spent 42 years designing bridges and consulting on development projects across this country. He paused briefly. Tonight I heard something interesting. Vanessa shifted slightly near the stage. Arthur continued. I heard a speech about family support, about lifting each other up, about showing up for the people who matter. The room was quiet now. Arthur's voice remained steady. That's something I believe strongly in. Then he looked directly at Vanessa. But I think stories about family deserve to be accurate. The air in the courtyard tightened. Vanessa's smile began to fade. Arthur turned slightly toward the audience. 6 weeks ago, I attended a wedding. A small ceremony in a barn outside Franklin. 21 guests, 42 chairs, half of them empty. Guests began glancing around, confused. Arthur continued. The bride was Vanessa's sister, Marissa. Every camera in the courtyard turned toward me. I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine. Arthur's voice never changed. The bride's father had promised to walk her down the aisle. He didn't show up. The bride's mother didn't attend either. Most of the family chose another event happening that afternoon. Vanessa's charity coordinator froze near the stage. Vanessa herself looked stunned. Arthur continued calmly. So I walked Marissa down the aisle instead, because someone should show up when it matters. A murmur spread through the crowd. Arthur wasn't finished. Later that evening, I watched Daniel and Marissa celebrate their marriage with 21 people. No sponsors, no cameras, just people who cared enough to be present. He paused. Then he said the sentence that shifted the entire room. That is what family support actually looks like. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Guests glanced between Vanessa and my parents. Vanessa's face had turned pale. Arthur stepped away from the microphone. No anger, no drama, just truth. And the truth didn't need to shout. But the damage was already done. Because in one quiet speech, the entire narrative Vanessa had built that night had cracked open. People were whispering now, looking at my parents, looking at Vanessa, looking at me. Vanessa rushed back to the microphone, trying to recover. Thank you, Arthur, for sharing that. Her voice sounded forced. Families have complicated schedules sometimes, but we always support each other in the end. Arthur didn't respond. He simply returned to his table beside Eleanor Hart. But the atmosphere had changed. The crowd wasn't clapping anymore. They were thinking. Because now the story of the gala had two versions, Vanessa's speech about family loyalty and Arthur's quiet description of empty chairs at a wedding. And people could see the difference. But the night wasn't over yet, because 10 minutes later, Eleanor Hart would step onto that same stage, and what she said next would change the conversation from awkward to unforgettable. Chapter 11. At 9:03 p.m., 13 minutes after Arthur Maddox stepped off the stage, the room was still whispering. You could feel it. That strange shift in the air when a room full of people realizes the story they've been hearing isn't the full truth. Vanessa stood near the stage, smiling for photographers. But the smile looked tight now, forced. And that's when Eleanor Hart stood up. If you've ever seen someone try to hold on to control of a situation while the ground slowly moves under them, you know the exact moment it happens. It's subtle at first. A pause, a glance, a change in tone. That moment had arrived for my sister. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. When someone lies about you publicly, do you defend yourself immediately, or do you let the truth reveal itself? Because what happened next wasn't an argument. It was something far more effective. Eleanor Hart didn't rush. She walked toward the stage the same way she had walked down the aisle at my wedding reception table weeks earlier. Calm, measured, confident. The event coordinator hesitated for half a second, unsure if the program allowed another speaker. But Eleanor already had the microphone. "Good evening," her voice carried easily across the courtyard. "For those who don't know me, my name is Eleanor Hart." A few people in the room immediately recognized the name. Not everyone, but the business owners did. The developers did. The investors definitely did. Eleanor owned a private investment group that backed large infrastructure projects across several states, which meant when she spoke, certain people paid very close attention. "I hadn't planned to speak tonight," she continued, "but Mr. Maddox reminded me of something important. Stories about family should be accurate." Vanessa stood frozen beside the stage. The smile was completely gone now. Eleanor continued calmly. 6 weeks ago, I attended a small wedding in Franklin, the same wedding Arthur mentioned. She looked directly at Daniel and me. It was one of the most genuine celebrations I've attended in years. No cameras, no sponsorships, just two people making a promise. The guests listened carefully now, because Eleanor Hart wasn't part of Vanessa's influencer world. She belonged to the world of money. Real money. Eleanor continued. "The groom, Daniel Reeves, is currently the lead structural engineer on the Riverspan development project in Austin." Several people in the crowd murmured. The number associated with that project had begun circulating recently. $22 million. Eleanor spoke clearly. "My firm is one of the primary investors in that project." Vanessa blinked. That information had not been part of her speech, and it wasn't something she controlled. Eleanor smiled slightly. "When Arthur invited me to Daniel and Marissa's wedding, I accepted for one reason. I like to observe people before investing in projects that require trust." She paused. "And what I saw that day impressed me. Not because of money, because of character." Daniel stood quietly beside me. Eleanor gestured gently toward him. "A man who keeps his promises. A woman who stays calm even when people disappoint her. Those are the kinds of people you want building things that last decades." The room was silent now. Every word carried weight. Eleanor continued. "Which is why my firm has decided to expand our partnership with the Riverspan development." Several heads turned. Some guests clearly recognized what that sentence meant. The new project value will exceed $30 million. The murmurs returned, louder this time. $30 million? Daniel inhaled slowly beside me. Even he hadn't heard that number yet. Eleanor finished calmly. "And Daniel Reeves will remain the lead structural engineer overseeing that project." She handed the microphone back to the coordinator. "Thank you for your time." That was it. No drama, no accusation, just facts. But the effect on the room was immediate. People who had barely acknowledged Daniel earlier were suddenly paying attention. Investors approached him. Developers introduced themselves. Business cards appeared. Vanessa stood near the stage, watching the entire shift happen in real time. Her gala, her spotlight, her event. But the conversation had moved somewhere else entirely. One guest whispered near our table. "$30 million?" Another replied quietly. "That's a major development contract." My father looked stunned. My mother stared at Daniel like she was seeing him for the first time. Vanessa finally walked toward us. Her smile returned, but it looked brittle now. Wow, that was unexpected. Daniel nodded politely. Seems that way. Vanessa leaned closer. Why didn't you tell the family the project got bigger? Daniel answered calmly. No one asked. That sentence landed like a quiet hammer. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward the surrounding guests, who were still discussing the announcement. Then she tried one more move. Well, I guess success runs in the family. The words sounded hollow, because everyone in the room now understood something. Daniel's success had nothing to do with Vanessa, nothing to do with her gala, nothing to do with her brand. It came from quiet work, years of it. Arthur approached our table again. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Congratulations. Daniel looked at him. You knew about the expansion. Arthur smiled slightly. I suspected. Then he glanced toward Vanessa across the courtyard. Stories have a way of correcting themselves. Vanessa's event continued for another hour, but the mood had changed. The cameras still flashed, the music still played. Yet the attention had shifted. People weren't talking about the charity anymore. They were talking about the engineer leading a $30 million project, and the small wedding most of the family had skipped. Later that night, my father approached me near the parking lot. His voice sounded quiet. Marissa? Yes? I should have been at your wedding. It wasn't a dramatic apology, just a sentence. But it took him 31 years to say something like that. I nodded. I know. He looked at Daniel. You're a good man. Daniel answered politely. Thank you. Then my father said something else. Something I didn't expect. Your mother and we made mistakes. Plural. More than one. But I didn't answer right away, because forgiveness doesn't happen in a single conversation. It happens slowly, the same way trust breaks slowly. But that night, as Daniel and I drove home under the quiet Tennessee sky, I realized something. Vanessa had spent months building a story where she was the center. But one calm speech from Arthur and one announcement from Eleanor had revealed a different truth entirely. And my sister, who loved controlling every narrative, had just lost control of the biggest one. 6 months after the gala, I stood barefoot in the grass behind the house Daniel and I had just finished paying for. Not renting, not financing, paid in full. The house sat on 3 quiet acres outside Franklin, Tennessee. White siding, a wraparound porch, and a workshop behind the garage, where Daniel had already started building models for the next bridge design his firm was pitching. The air smelled like lavender from the garden beds we planted that spring, and for the first time in a long time, my life felt quiet in the best possible way. But before I tell you how everything ended with my family, I want to ask you something. If the people who hurt you finally realize their mistake, would you let them back into your life? Or would you keep the distance you worked so hard to build? Because forgiveness sounds simple until it actually happens. A lot changed in those 6 months. The Riverspan project officially expanded to $30 million. Construction crews broke ground in Austin. Daniel spent some weeks traveling between Tennessee and Texas, overseeing early structural phases. Engineering magazines started mentioning his name. Nothing flashy, just professional recognition, the kind that comes slowly and stays for decades. Meanwhile, my own life shifted too. 3 weeks after the gala, the veterinary hospital where I worked offered me a promotion. Lead surgical technician. Better hours, higher pay, more responsibility. I accepted. Because for the first time, I wasn't constantly exhausted trying to prove something to people who weren't paying attention. Arthur Maddox visited our new house once a month, always bringing a bottle of good whiskey. He would sit on the porch with Daniel, discussing structural load designs and bridge materials while the sun went down. Eleanor Hart visited once as well. She walked through the workshop behind the house and studied Daniel's sketches. You're building something solid here. She meant the house, but she also meant something else, something quieter. The kind of life that doesn't need an audience. As for Vanessa, the internet moved on. Her gender reveal video eventually stopped climbing in views. The charity nonprofit she launched never gained much traction. Without constant content, followers drifted. That's how social media works. Attention is temporary, but reality lasts longer. Her boyfriend Tyler's marketing company never found the $300,000 in investors she hoped for. The business shrank instead of expanding. Vanessa eventually took on smaller influencer sponsorships again. Not gone, just quieter. And the funny thing was, the person who struggled the most with everything that happened wasn't Vanessa. It was my parents. The gala had traveled through local business circles quickly, not because of drama, because of Arthur's speech, because of Eleanor's announcement. People remembered, and small towns remember stories. My mother called me every Sunday for a while. At first, the conversations were awkward. Weather, work, small talk. But slowly they became more honest. One afternoon, she finally said it. "We should have been there, at your wedding." Yes, we should have. No excuses, just truth. That was the first real step. My father visited the house 2 months later. He arrived quietly one afternoon, with a small wooden frame in his hand. Inside was a photograph. Not from the gala, not from Vanessa's reveal. From my wedding. Arthur walking me down the aisle. Daniel waiting beneath the arch. The lavender chairs. Your mother printed it. He placed the frame on the kitchen counter. I thought it should be in your house. I looked at the photograph for a long time. It still showed the empty chairs. But now those empty seats meant something different. They showed exactly who had chosen not to be there, and exactly who had stepped in when it mattered. My father spoke again before leaving. "I should have walked you down that aisle." I nodded slowly. "Yes, you should have." He didn't argue. He just stood there quietly. Then I poured 2 cups of coffee. We sat on the porch for 20 minutes, not fixing everything, just beginning. Vanessa wrote me a letter eventually. Not a text, not a message, an actual letter. 3 pages. Most of it was defensive. Most of it explained her stress during the pregnancy. But in the middle of the second page, there was one sentence. I knew scheduling the reveal on your wedding day would force people to choose. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. Because that sentence mattered more than the rest. It was the truth. And once you see the truth clearly, you stop wondering if you imagined the hurt. Vanessa and I speak occasionally now. Polite, careful, not close. Maybe someday that will change. Maybe it won't. And that's okay. Because forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the past never happened. It means deciding how much space someone gets in your future. One evening in early autumn, Daniel and I hosted dinner in our backyard. Rachel came. Arthur came. Lauren drove down. Daniel's parents brought homemade pie. 7 people sat around the table, the same number that mattered most at the wedding. The sunset turned the sky orange behind the trees. Laughter moved easily across the yard. Daniel leaned toward me quietly. "You know something funny?" "What?" "Your sister's party had 200 guests." I nodded. "And this feels bigger." Because it was. 42 chairs, 21 guests. A wedding most of my family skipped. And yet somehow that small day created everything that followed. The career opportunities, the house, the life we built. Sometimes the quiet moments become the most important ones, not because of who shows up, but because of who doesn't, and what that absence teaches you. Self-respect is a strange kind of revenge. You don't shout. You don't destroy anything. You simply stop waiting for people who already showed you where you stand. And once you do that, the right people tend to appear naturally. So now I want to ask you one final question. If you had received those empty chairs on your wedding day, would you have answered your family's calls later? Or would you have left the phone in the drawer? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe, because there's another story coming soon. And trust me, that one starts with an inheritance dinner where exactly one chair at the table was missing.